Welcome to episode 84 of the Band Hive Podcast.
You're listening to the Band Hive Podcast, the number one online resource for DIY bands to learn about the music business and touring. If you want to turn your band into a lean, mean touring machine, you're in the right place. Now, let's get this show on the road.
It is time for another episode of the Band Hive Podcast. My name is James Cross, and I'm not here with Matt Hose today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but it is for a very good reason. He's up in Washington with his band Alive in Barcelona, and they are back in the studio. So keep an eye out for new Alive in Barcelona songs soon. But I'm very pleased to have here Andy Wilson-Taylor of Midgar and Sector 7 Studios. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us, Andy. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be talking to a human being rather than being stuck in the studio working on stuff by myself, like I seem to perpetually be doing these days.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. And like I said, thank you for joining us. And it is definitely good to be outside the studio bubble for a bit. I definitely feel your pain on that. It is always good to get outside of the bubble and take a step back from music and audio work and have a conversation. I can definitely appreciate that. So let's talk about that. But before we get into it, let's go back in time to about 2008, which is when you founded Midgar, your band, and you took a break for a few years. But now you're back, and on June 25th, which at the time this episode airs will be in the past, you'll have released your new album, Unity. Can you tell us a little bit about your story as an artist, both before and during Midgar?
Wow. I mean, how to reduce 13 years into a digestible little story here that I'm not going to drag it on for ages and ages and ages. So I've been a musician my whole life. I was kind of classically trained in my primary school years and then picked up guitar and drums through secondary school when I realized that that's a bit more exciting than the piano, especially if you're, trying to meet girls and stuff. I mean, no one goes to the classical recitals, but they love it when you pick up a guitar. So I was really into that in school. So into it, in fact, that I ended up going to music school afterwards, where I studied drums and percussion at the Academy of Contemporary Music in Guildford. And I started there in 2006, and I was sat next to a guy who became my best friend at music school and ultimately has become one of the best session drummers like in the UK or in Europe. I mean, he was on the front cover of Rhythm magazine last year. It's crazy. He's just been doing the Ed Sheeran tour. Anyway, that gives you an idea about how great he was. I had this idea back then that I was going to start a band and he was going to play drums in it, because I was like, he's so much better than me. I can get away with singing and playing guitar and writing songs, and we're going to do this together. So we started Midgar all the way back then, and we spent the following kind of 4 years or so doing like the DIY underground circuit tours and, toilet venues. Sleeping on van floors, like waking up in the gutter in Dundee in December when it's like -9 degrees outside. Just hell. But the stuff you have to do if you kind of want to make it as a band. And we did that for a few years and, loved it for the most part, struggled through, released a couple of records and ended up touring with some of our heroes as well, which was just kind of dream come true stuff. And we got to around late 2012, early 2013, right around the time the last Midgar album came out, Holographic Principle. And it was around that time that my life just kind of fell to pieces. I think it was kind of maybe the years of kind of doing this touring stuff wears you down. It definitely broke the relationship I was in. And ultimately, around kind of Easter time 2013, I found myself at the end of this relationship that I thought was going to be the one. We were going to get married and have kids, and then it was over in a second. And I was not equipped to deal with that situation because of all the years I'd spent maybe doing music or kind of not focusing on myself as a person. And I just completely went the wrong way with it and spent the next few years not making music at all because I was too invested in drinking and partying and just being, I guess, a tornado of bad decisions. And I ruined my voice, like I couldn't sing, and it was really terrible, and I wasn't being creative. And a few years after that, I actually met the girl who would soon become my wife. And things took a completely different turn after that point. And in the early days of our relationship, we had a lot of fun, but she was like, this has to stop. Like the madness and the self-destructive stuff, like it has to stop. Like, I love you, but this sucks. We need to do something about this. So we ended up leaving the UK and moving to France and buying an old rundown farmhouse, like a ruin, which we spent, a year renovating by ourselves. I ended up building a recording studio on the grounds here, which is what I'm in at the moment. And I made a promise to myself, the very first thing that I would do once this studio was finished, to the point where I could just occupy it, would be to revisit what I wanted to do for the last decade, and that's to make another Midgar album. So then I set about beginning that last year, and it was a solo effort this time, mostly because of circumstance, with travel restrictions, and like Ollie's super busy, and I would love to make a record with him again. We just didn't get to do it this time. So I did everything here at my studio in France and finished it towards the back half of last year. And now here we are. It's coming out in a couple of days' time. And by the time people listen to this, it's going to be out. And that scares the hell out of me because it's just been this long, long journey and such a personal process of kind of rebuilding my life. And then this album kind of tells that story. And it's like I'm getting my diary of the whole process. And I'm just going like, here, read this. It's just such a terrifying prospect to put that all out there. So it's been a roller coaster, but a journey that I'm really proud to be at this point in right now.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like quite the up and down. And one thing I think that's interesting to me, although I play music and I do audio, I'm not a songwriter. And I always see so many songwriters who they put out their best work when they're down in the dumps and everything's going wrong. And for you, it's the exact opposite. When you were having such a tough time, you gave up on music. And now that you're doing better, that's when you came back and revisited music to tell those stories. I'd love to go a little bit more down that path and talk about what that experience was like looking back on the bad times now that you're having good times. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was tough in a way to revisit some of those feelings and those emotions because I still feel them really deeply. And I think you have to put your entire self into those moments if you're going to draw something creatively from them. And you don't want to rile the beast. You don't want to awaken those demons that you've put to bed all that time ago. But I think if ever there was a part of me that hadn't fully dealt with the stuff that I went through over those years, writing the songs about it and being creative about it, finally confronted all of those things and gave me closure on them. You know what I mean?
So in a way, this is helping it come full circle in that chapter of your life. Essentially, this is putting it to bed, saying, okay, this is me now, I'm good. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. It was all the stories that I was too embarrassed or ashamed to tell while I was going through them, and all the things I was too afraid to admit to myself. And it sucks when you're in it, right? And you look at yourself in the mirror and you go like, what am I doing? Who have I become? But you can almost like take a snapshot at that moment and then like recall it later and measure yourself against it and go, wow, like I've really come a long way. I value that moment for what it was, and there's something to be learned and to be taken from that moment right at the bottom. And I guess this album confronts what it is to be human and have faults, right? And to accept them and to learn from them and to know that those faults made you who you are. And that's okay. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche, but no one's perfect. That's just how we are. So I think it's incredibly powerful that you're able to look back and, like you said, open up your diary to your audience and put that out there. But, it's also, with the Bandhive podcast, I love to dig deep on business topics. So obviously you're releasing new music, which is great, but you're also working in a couple different fields. You're doing composition for film and TV advertisements. Particularly, you're working with major brands all around the world. And as part of that renovation of the farmhouse, you've opened a B&B, which is not a thing right now with the travel restrictions. But it shows really that you have not just the passion for music, but also the entrepreneurial spirit. Another thing is you want to open up your studio and have that be a residential location where people can come work with you and you produce their music. So you've got a couple different things cooking. And just to get into that side of things, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the composition for film and TV side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I never really considered doing, but people had always said like, oh, the music you write, it'd be great in a film. They said that the whole time I was songwriting. And it was funny enough, around that late 2012, early 2013 time period when things just completely broke, that I actually started writing music for TV and film. This is the crazy thing. So I was working a full-time job in retail at the same time. And I would kind of work through the nights doing music for TV and film. And it was because of Midgar that happened. One of our music videos that we recorded in 2010 We had like a pretty decent crew on that music video. We were really lucky that we had loads of people working on that. And many of those people then went on to go and do amazing things in kind of film and TV. One of them I stayed in touch with, and she became a producer for some short films and ultimately some Hollywood films. And she asked me to write the little score for an independent film which had like a Hollywood name in it. It was just like a little short independent thing. No budget. The contract was I was going to get paid £1 for this score that I wrote. I never got the £1. They never sent it to me. But this film ended up being the thing that I could then use as a portfolio and attract a little bit of attention from people across in the United States. And I got an email from a company who were based out, well, at the time they were Portland only, but they became Portland, Los Angeles, and New York. And then they contacted me saying, we'd love for you to take a run at making some music for some of our projects. And most of their projects are, I guess, they're feature advertisements, like for companies like Nike and Google and Coca-Cola. Like they get Hollywood directors to do the commercials for them, the kind of things you might see at the Super Bowl, the biggest commercials on the planet. And they were just like, yeah, have a go at doing some of this. I'm like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll try. That turned into a career for me. And I did that for a few years. And it was great. I loved doing that. And I still love doing it. The problem is that it was quite intense working that day job and working that night job. And that was one of the things that contributed to me just kind of failing so epically in my life at the time, because I guess I was quite a high functioning addict in a way. Like I loved working and I would focus all my attention towards working because working would give me money and I could spend that money on getting out of my mind. So it was just this cycle of working crazy hard and then also letting off steam in the most destructive way possible because I could afford to. And it just drove me into the ground like a meteor, you know, it hit so hard. And it was that decision to get out of it and to come and do something more practical, maybe something a little bit slower paced, you know, like renovating a farmhouse where your problems that you have to solve are much more straightforward. Like I need to plaster this wall and that's like a hands-on job and there is a tangible, real product at the end of it. I felt like making something with your hands and taking the time over it and investing some physical, I guess, energy and some love into what you're building gave me a completely different kind of satisfaction than the one I got from making music or doing compositions for TV and film. Coincidentally, it also didn't pay me any money. It was just, I was doing this for myself. And that was the kind of therapy I needed to like slow my brain down and fix everything. Like putting the house together felt like I was putting parts of myself back together again. And it was a nice little bonus at the end of it that what we built was somewhere where we could have holidaymakers come and stay with us. And we had a business that we could run ourselves and we owned and would ultimately facilitate a life away from the madness of a city. You don't have these crazy expensive bills to pay. You know, your cost of living and pace of life is very different. And I find my mental health is in a much better place living out here in the countryside than I was doing the rat race thing and just burning the candle at both ends as hard as I possibly could.
Absolutely. You know, I live in Vermont, which is a very rural state in the US and not even a city in Vermont. I live in the outskirts. I can see 2 houses from where I'm at and it's amazing. I've lived in the city and I loved the city, but it's so different. I totally understand what you're feeling because I'm looking back, I'm like, yeah, I used to be so stressed when I lived in the city. Now I'm just like, okay, cool, whatever. Like, this is life. This is great. And I don't want to go back to the city. I mean, I'll visit, but I don't want to live there. So I think that makes a huge difference too. And I see so many artists, even from Vermont, who have decided to say, hey, if we want to make it as an artist, we have to go to the city. And I think that it's great that for you, you're saying, no, I'm going to set up this business where I can make a living. I can make the art that I want to make, but I don't have to move to a city to do this. And you did the exact opposite. I think that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I accidentally hit upon something which has become really relevant over the last 18 months. I mean, we moved out here in 2018, so yeah, none of us saw 2020 coming, you know, but working remotely is such a normal thing. I mean, what we're doing now, talking to one another, I don't think this would have been suggested even in 2018 because it's like you would reach out to your network that's local to you to make this kind of thing happen. Whereas now it's like we have the whole world talking to one another via these kind of meetings and it really doesn't matter where I am at all. And that's a really happy coincidence that we did that when we did it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would have been nice if people had 2020 vision, pun intended.
Yeah, for sure.
But being set up for that purely by accident is really a lucky thing. Same for me. I was in a city until the end of 2018. so good to be out of there. I have one question for you about the TV and film. Not just one, but one big one, which is when you came back to music, now that you're out in southern France in the country, are you still composing for TV and film, or is that something that you've moved on from entirely?
Yeah, I'm still doing it. I'm doing less of it, not because we're here, but because most of the productions that I would normally work on are on skeleton crews, the budgets are slashed. Everybody's kind of experiencing this lack of opportunity to work in the way they used to. So bits and bobs here and there, but I guess it's another happy coincidence that that's kind of slowed down a little bit while I've had the opportunity to focus on this album campaign, because I think if I was juggling both those two things, I didn't know how much work really goes into releasing an album. I guess I'd forgotten, or things have changed a lot since we last did it. Like, it's a lot. I mean, the kind of demands of being a content creator as well as being a musician, there's so many more things expected of you these days than there were when I last released a record all that time ago. Not that I'm 100 years old or anything, but just, I don't know, you just got to make all these YouTube videos and everything. And I'm not sure I would successfully juggle that, because the deadlines normally for the TV stuff is just like they want it yesterday. You know, it's like, here's the email at 4:35 in the morning. We want this back the second you've had your breakfast, basically.
Yeah. Let's talk about the process of putting out an album a little bit, because I see a lot of artists doing so well with it, pushing their album and putting out great content. And then I see a lot of other DIY artists who they'll say, hey, our album's coming out next week. And then next week, hey, the album's out. And then you never hear anything again. And so let's dive in and talk a little bit about everything you're doing to push this album, because you are putting a lot of content out there. Can you give us, I guess, like an A to Z of what you've been doing to lead up to the release?
Yeah, I mean, the music videos is the big one. So I finished creating the record in autumn time last year. And that was when we kind of set up the arrangement with the record label, Year of the Rat Records as well, and kind of set our timeline rolling for the release and kind of decided what we were going to do. And once we decided the singles and what order they were going to go into, James at the label was like, we need music videos for these things. And I'm like, okay, we need music videos, but I mean, I can't pay for them and I don't know what I'm doing. But I didn't tell him that. I was like, yes, okay, yes, we need music videos for these songs. So I figured out how to make music videos over the winter, which was a really fun, rewarding, and kind of exciting learning process for me as somebody who had absolutely no idea what they were doing beforehand. So like that's been a huge amount of work, planning all the shoots and actually delivering them and editing and all that stuff. I mean, each one would take me probably a couple of weeks front to back minimum. And then I guess there's a few other things that I'm doing at the moment, which is, I guess, lifting the curtain on some of that behind the scenes process. So I'm creating a little bit of like a behind the music YouTube series, which is just these little teasers running up to the album, giving people like first looks at different sections of the songs, maybe what the songs mean. Next week, I'm doing a behind the music video thing where I go fully in depth and into the detail about how I actually created these music videos, because I feel like if I've learned all of these things, it'd be really just unkind of me not to share, right? Because there's going to be so many people out there also like this who have this music they want to release, they want to make music videos, but they just think it costs crazy money, and it doesn't anymore. You can just do it by yourself if you're resourceful enough. So all of this additional content tells the story of the record, and I guess that's what differentiates people these days, is the story behind the record, because music's everywhere. The value of the music itself, sadly, is diminished to the point where like everyone's releasing albums, like you say, and like no one really cares that much. But if you have a compelling story about how the album was created, what it means, and what you're investing into it yourself, then I think people pay attention a little bit. What I struggle with is the social media stuff, because Facebook and Instagram and stuff, just unless you're paying to promote the content, it's just really impossible to reach your audience. I mean, we've got almost 4,000 people on the Midgar Facebook page, but I don't think any of them see the content. So it is tough when you have to just consistently post stuff all the time. And I'm terrible at that. My wife always tells me off for it. She's like, post something every single day. I've got too much to do. I can't think about that. So feedback for myself, that's the thing I need to get better at to make the algorithms happy and push this stuff out to people. Content is king. Make as much content as you can and give people stuff to consume, and they will consume it, hopefully.
You know, again, I feel your struggle because I always advocate for artists to post on social media daily, and I'm terrible at posting on social media. But one thing that has helped me a bunch, and I hope it will help you, is that I just batch content and schedule it all. And that is so much easier, because I used to just try to post something every day and it never happened. And now batching that content, at least doing, 3 or 4 days worth at a time, has helped so much. and then using a scheduling tool like Publer or Buffer or something like that. I hope that's something that if you aren't already dabbling with that, you can pick that up and make your life a little bit easier.
I will look into those apps. Yeah, I use the native scheduling tools for some Facebook stuff, but I've really only figured that out like in the last 10 days. That makes it easier for me to deliver on this stuff. But then I kind of feel guilty in a way because stuff goes out and I'm not kind of there to like respond to stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like I sometimes forget a post's gone out. Then I feel kind of detached from it. So I don't know. I think it's difficult either way.
So what I like about Publer and Buffer, both of them do this, is you can, first of all, schedule content if it's appropriate for the platform on multiple platforms. So for example, we have little teaser clips for Bandhive podcasts. There'll be one or several of you from this episode that will pull key things you've said and put them on social media. And they go out to Instagram and Facebook, and I can schedule them both through Publer or Buffer. I've been using Publer for a while now, but Buffer is what I used to use. And I don't even have to set a time because I have a predefined schedule that it posts on. So I just say, for example, at this time every week, post something with the tag preview 1, and then the next day preview 2. And so when I go in and I'm scheduling it, I just say, put this in the next empty preview 1 slot, because that's always going to be the next week that I'm scheduling. And so it takes all the thought out of scheduling it. It's like as simple as it can be. Whereas on Facebook, if you're using their scheduling tools, which are quite useful, you have to think about what time do I want to post this? Like, where do I put this in? Whereas with Publer, I just look at my analytics to see when people are most online on that specific day of the week and say, okay, this is the time it's going to be. And then I set that, and then every couple of months I check up on it to see if that's still a good time to post. But I'm not trying to make this episode about me, just trying to share some information that I think will be useful to you and others who are listening.
I wish that I'd got this information from you like 3 months ago.
Better late than never.
It's super valuable. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, man. I really hope it helps. It's going to still be a struggle for what you mentioned about not being there when it goes out, but you can always put your push notifications on and do that. Or if you're like me, my phone is on Do Not Disturb almost 24/7. So I get to it when I get to it. You know, social media is about being instant. Well, okay, maybe people can wait a couple hours. It's not the end of the world, in my opinion. Anyway, enough about that. I want to touch on something else you said, which was you didn't know how to do a music video, and you said, okay, cool, let's do it. There are so many artists who would have said, no, we don't have the money for that. We're not going to do that. And put up resistance to any suggestions like that. But it seems like you just said, okay, we'll figure this out. Like, we'll do it. And having seen some of the videos you've put out, they look professionally produced. It's not a DIY. I mean, it is DIY. You've done it yourself. But it's not the typical DIY, looks like it was shot on a potato music video. Like, I want to highlight there the fact that you didn't put up resistance to it. And then when you figured out how to do it, you didn't put in the minimum effort possible. You actually went and learned how to do it and learned what would make it look good, which I have a feeling your experience in the audio world tied into that, because with audio, you know, hey, quality is so important. So when you have that experience in audio, you look at video and say, you know, I have to do this right because quality is important. But I think that's a really valuable lesson to learn for artists who don't have that experience, perhaps. Would you be able to share some of the resources maybe that you looked at when you were trying to figure out how to put out a music video for no budget?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is really valuable that you pick up that moment where I just said yes. That's not something that I would have done maybe 10 or 11 years ago. And I don't know if it's just like the madness or the naivety or like the completely ridiculous positivity that I seem to have towards solving problems these days. It comes from a few things. Like, I worked for a company, that company I worked for when I was working for them in the daytime and doing the composition for TV and film in the evening. I'm not going to name them, but they're the biggest company on the planet, right? So there's like a culture that comes with that company and the experiences you have with that company and the training you get with that company that maybe just makes you look at the world in a way where you go, I have a problem, I'm going to solve it. And I took that with me and then used it, like you say, with audio, but then also with the house, right? The house taught me that too. Like, the electrics need redoing in this house. Okay, well, I can't afford to pay someone to do it, so I'm just going to have to do it myself. Like, you don't have a choice. You just push forward. You either scale the wall or you redefine the problem. That's how you get to where you want to get to. And doing the music videos was the same. It's like, I have a problem. I either scale the wall and climb it and get over it, or I redefine it and I try and figure out a way to get the result I want without having to solve the problem the difficult way. So I guess, like you say, recognize that a certain quality is necessary and you just drive for that. You just push for that quality with what you have and you don't stop until you get it. So the resources that I would use to try and make these things, I mean, YouTube, it's all on YouTube, everything, it's all there. I would just spend days, weeks even, just trawling through content for those little nuggets of information. And don't get me wrong, like some of it's trash, right? Some of the information on YouTube is from people who shouldn't be sharing information. There's a lot of YouTube experts out there who just don't know what they're talking about. But there are actually some really valuable opinions and bits of information out there as well. And you go through enough information, eventually you'll get something worth reading or hearing. And I would watch all of my favorite movies or favorite TV series and just like pause it and just look at it and just look at the position of the characters on the screen or look at the color palette that they were using or like just try and have some kind of sense of what I was feeling while experiencing watching that and why. Like what are the elements that have made it possible for me to feel that way while watching this thing? And just go online and just search like, okay, this director of photography did this. Have they ever written a blog? Great, cool. I'm going to read that blog. Or what camera did they use? Why did they use it? What shutter speed or frame rate did they use? And just digest everything, all of it. And then eventually have a go at doing it. I guess it sounds really daunting. It's not. It's just immersing yourself in the world of the stuff you want to learn about to the point where it just goes in eventually. And there's then also no better way of learning than doing. So once you kind of have absorbed enough information, you think, okay, well, I've got nothing left to read or listen to or look at. I'm going to go and have a go at it and just see what happens. And I was lucky and fortunate in a way that they came out great. I want to dress it up and say that there's a very specific thing that I did, but it's just, that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to have to take this interview down this path more. I was all ready to talk about composing, but what you've been saying here is so great. I think I'm going to ask one more composition question, and then I'm going to go back to what you're learning. And that question is, if there are other artists out there who want to supplement their music income from their band or their solo project by composing for film and TV, what would you suggest they do to get started? Okay,
so diversify the kind of music that you want to create, first of all. Many musicians and songwriters, they say, I do this. This is what I do. It's what I will always do. Working for TV and film does not work that way. You'll get a brief, and that brief will tell you what you need to do, and it won't be something that you've done before, 99% of the time. I had to do all sorts of stuff from electronica through to recording a bunch of Cornish fishermen doing an old World War I song for Sony PlayStation. Forget your preconceptions of what you are as an artist and explore other sounds and spend plenty of time working on creating those sounds. Learn how to arrange strings, learn how to play piano, learn how to produce. You have to be able to produce to a high enough standard because they will be using your final mixes on these things. And I didn't know that going in. Do I have time to tell you a really quick story about one of those jobs I did? It was really crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first sync I got, I landed, was for a commercial. It was a joint commercial for McDonald's and Coca-Cola. They were doing their first flagship ad since their 1970s I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing thing. It was a combination of that song and the Big Mac song. The two all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, right? Which, as a Brit, I've never heard. That was not a thing in the UK. I'd heard the Coca-Cola thing, but not the McDonald's thing. It was just completely new to me. And the email came through. I was visiting my dad, who lives in Connecticut. And I flew over there and I got there in the morning with nothing other than some clothes. And the email said, we need you to demo on this today. We want a mashup of those two songs. It needs to be kind of contemporary and modern, but with a callback to the original thing. And I'm like, I'm in America. I don't have any instruments and I don't have a computer. And I'm jet lagged. So, I mean, you know what I said, right? I said, yeah, that's fine. I'll be with you in a few hours. Right? This is my life. I say to my dad, hi, nice to see you. It's been quite a long time. I need to do some work and I need to borrow your computer and I need you to go to your office and get a conferencing microphone and I need you to dig that guitar out of your cupboard that hasn't been played since the original Coca-Cola I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing ad came out in 1976, right? And I'm going to do this on your desk and I'm going to write this mashup of the song and I'm going to send it to them. And that recording, right, that I did in his house in Connecticut with no studio gear, his old 2011 iMac and his crappy guitar and microphone. That recording ended up getting played to 15 million people during the first ad break in the American Music Awards as like Coca-Cola McDonald's like flagship advertising campaign. It was crazy. So what's my point? Forget what you think you do. I could get that email and be like, I don't do jingly Big Mac songs. I'm a real artist. I write sad songs and I use fun time signatures and I'm much more serious than that. That could have been my attitude. But instead my attitude was like, yeah, I'm going to have a go at that because I'm going to see what comes from it. If nothing comes from it, I just learned a new skill, whatever. And you do that enough times and something's going to stick. And it did. And that commercial changed my life completely. Ultimately, it meant we could buy this house. That was kind of where it ended up leading to. So say yes to stuff. Don't let any opportunity pass you by and be ridiculously hungry for the work because there'll be someone hungrier than you if you're not. The mechanics of the way it works, a music supervision company are the people that provide music for TV and film. If you work for a music supervision company as a freelancer, they are your gateway to getting this stuff synced. So music supervision houses will find existing pieces of music that directors and content creators want, but they will also get composers like me to write music for stuff if they can't find the exact piece of music that they want. So speak to music supervision houses. If you like the way a certain film sounds, look at the credits and look who did the music supervision and email them and say, I really loved that. I'm a composer that does stuff in this kind of world. I'd love to demo on something for you. And you never know, you might get an email back.
Man, that's great. I'm amazed that they used that demo and didn't say, hey, please re-record this, which that tells me that you took those limitations that you had and used your knowledge and skill to turn that around and say, well, this isn't a limitation. This is how I'm going to do this. Which goes back to, not saying no, not turning it down, just saying, okay, we got this. And I totally thought that story was going to go, I called up every studio in town and finally found one that wasn't booked. And then you just hit us with, oh yeah, used an old iMac with an ancient guitar that hadn't had a setup in 30 years, 40 years, however long it was. That's stellar. And so that actually does bring me to one more question, since you mentioned that commercial helped you to buy that house, which is awesome. But one question that people are going to be wondering probably is, how does payment work on this? Is it an upfront payment for sync, or do you collect royalties, or is it a little bit of both? How does that work typically in the industry?
I think it varies region to region. I can only really talk to my very specific experiences of it. And it depends where you are and who you're working for. Most of the work I do, I would get paid for my time for demoing, first of all. So like a brief comes through, it's like, we want you to have a run at this. Great, I'll get paid a demo fee, and that'll be a couple of $100 for my time, which is great. And if you do enough of them, you can live off the demo fees. It's a really, really good way to earn money. The real money comes when they select your song, obviously, right? It's like, you win, here's your check. And that normally is in the form of a buyout. So what that buyout entitles the company to do is to not pay you royalties in perpetuity. It's like, we own this piece of music. We can do whatever we want with it. We can exploit it forever. And we don't ever need to talk to you again. So the Coca-Cola McDonald's thing was like that. It was a buyout. And it would have been anyway, because I was dealing with intellectual property that actually wasn't even mine in the first place. They were two existing pieces of music that I then did my thing with. The buyout fees are generally pretty good, right? Because they're paying you to go away, basically.
Yeah, it's a work made for hire at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Work for hire. But there's also like another little weird loophole, which I kind of benefited from over the years. And I did a lot of work for Coca-Cola in this respect. Sometimes they will need to re-record vocals because the vocals are recorded with union singers, and unions in the United States demand high royalty rates for their vocalists. So high, in fact, that it ends up making it unattractive for people to pay union vocalists. Now, as someone from the outsider of this process, I mean, I don't know, like, I kind of feel they're taking work away from union vocalists by doing this, by making the fees too high. Because what ends up happening is I get a phone call saying, hey, can you do this for me in the UK so that we can circumvent these union singers and then just pay you a buyout fee and then there's no royalties to pay?
Yeah, they're looking at the upfront fee and saying, hey, we're done with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a funny one. But yeah, most stuff, generally speaking, is work for hire. It's complicated being the fact that I was in Europe and stuff was going out in the United States, because there are projects that I have been owed royalties on, which I've never got because the collection agencies in the UK, I don't have very kind words to say about them.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I've been working as a musician for my whole life, and I have probably only earned about £20 in royalties that have been collected through the collection agencies in the UK. It's crazy. So work for hire is an attractive option for me because I don't imagine those royalties are going to be collected, basically.
Yeah, that seems really frustrating because obviously the PROs, and I'm assuming this is what you're talking about as the PROs, performance rights organizations, they're supposed to work together internationally for songwriters who've got a work out there that's being performed publicly. And it sounds like that's just not happening in your case. So that must be really frustrating.
Yeah, it is. And I don't really know what the solution is. I mean, I know other people who have had published works and stuff going out in the same way that mine have. And their little loophole has always been find someone who works for the company and make friends with them. And then they can look into it for you. But I think it just feels like it's one of those things where there's just too much work to do and not enough people doing it. And I've never seen my share sent to me. It's never happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's as frustrating as that is. It's good that in this situation, you've had the buyouts and the work for hire or work made for hire, because that way you get the nice fat upfront payment and you don't have to worry about looking at the books for who knows how many years. Because there's songs that have blown up 10, 20 years after the fact. And I can imagine that would be quite a headache, especially when the PRO isn't doing their job in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's probably easier if there are fewer people in the chain. When I'm doing this work for those advertising companies, for example, like I'm right at the back of the queue of people who gets their name on things. Like the creative team will then go to the music supervision agency and it'll go to the music supervisors themselves. And then I'll be the person that ends up signing the contract at the end of it being like, here's my work. But all of that gets fed back up the chain and then back down to the performing rights organizations as well. Whereas if I'm the owner of a song which I've written, which is being exploited, then I'm just named as a songwriter and I have access to that back end where I can just be like, hey, my song's just suddenly appeared on a Toyota commercial and like I can kind of just go directly there. You know what I mean? Whereas when I'm doing the work through the music supervision companies internationally, it's really hard to marry up those two sides of the puzzle there. You know, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, lots of red tape and bureaucracy, man. Well, to pivot back to you as a DIY artist, because I really want to go down that path more. When you were working on the album, you'd obviously already learned how to be a producer. The first few albums that you released with Midgar back a decade ago, did you self-produce those as well? Or had you worked with somebody else on those? And then let's just go back and say, how did you become a producer? What happened there?
So I was recording music on my own from age of 17, maybe 16, just as like a vehicle for songwriting. Like I have these ideas in my head and I want to hear them. How do I do that? So my cousin actually bought me my first microphone and audio interface, and I would just spend days at home recording songs that absolutely sucked, by the way, and sound horrible. They were just terrible. The earliest Midgar demos I did in 2007, and again, it was just like as a vehicle for getting them out. I never intended for them to be heard by anybody other than the band members when we were learning them together. So we went into the studio with a guy called Jason Wilson, who owns a studio just outside London called Stakeout Studios, where many of my favorite bands and artists had recorded. And again, it's that process of like, look at the credits. Where did this happen? Who worked on it? Great, let me contact that person. So I did. And we recorded our first EP together, just 4 tracks. And that was kind of how the band launched. So that was the Of the Ancients EP. So that was not self-produced at all. It was all produced, mixed, mastered by Jason. And he's a genius. He's a wizard. I love his work. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive. So it then came to the second kind of EP/mini album, which was the Lead Your Children to the Sky mini album. We self-produced and engineered that kind of as a band at the then bass player studio, which was in Surrey, which was a great studio. And we had the gift of time because we could just go in there whenever we wanted, stay the night. You know, there were times when I'd slept in the vocal booth for 5 days. I didn't see daylight when we were just like recording the CD. Like it was cool. It was like what you expect a band in the studio to be like. We didn't mix it though, because none of us knew how to. So the in-house mix engineer, Guy Davies, mixed that. He's a good friend and has done some amazing work. Then Holographic Principle, we didn't have access to that studio anymore. It closed, so we wanted to kind of emulate that process. So we hired a studio for 2 weeks down in the southwest of the UK and kind of did the same thing, just holed up, engineered it, recorded it ourselves. Again, didn't mix it because none of us knew really what we were doing. So we enlisted the services of a guy called Dan Lancaster, who we toured with back there a few times with his band Proceed. And Dan Lancaster has since taken over the planet. I mean, he's like the most successful mix engineer in the UK at the moment. It's completely crazy. He did a bunch of the Bring Me the Horizon stuff on their last and previous album. He's like songwriting for the biggest rock band in Japan, like One OK Rock. He does all the Don Broco stuff. I mean, the guy is a phenomenon, and trying to get him to work on any of our stuff now would just be impossible. So I then kind of spent the following few years doing the film and TV stuff and working on those deadlines and just saying yes to every job and, doing what I normally do, which is absorbing as much information as possible and honing my craft to the point where when I finally had my own place to do it, I could do this place justice and I knew what I was doing. And that really took a very, very intense 7 years, really, of just working at it all day, every single day, and trying not to fall too much off the wagon, which is what I was doing at the time. And now I have a studio where I work from. And the cool thing about that is that I now have clients who are coming in and using the studio because they hear the work I've done. And I'm involved in the music scene here in France to some degree, go out and do a lot of gigs and stuff. And there really isn't anything like that here. I absolutely love being a producer. I think it's one of my favorite things to do is to just inspect things so closely under that microscope and just get things sounding just so perfect. I really get a kick out of it. And I loved producing this all on my own. It was such a luxury to have the freedom of time, again, to have the space to work in and to be able to kind of segment those different parts of the production and the writing into different spaces. So I would spend, a month writing and then go away and then come back and spend like another 6 weeks, like recording drums, guitars, some orchestra stuff, some piano, all those bits, and then go away and then come back and do the vocals and then go away and then mix the thing, go away again and come back and master it. And like all those different things I could do in separate little kind of 4 to 6 week blocks over the course of last year. And yeah, having the ability to do that over such a long period of time, I guess, allowed me to get really into the detail and make this album sound the way I wanted it to sound. There's that same thing with the music videos, right? It's like, I have an idea about this end product. I want to figure out how that end product is created. And I'm going to do everything I can to get something that stands up to it because it's possible. So why not find out how? That's always been my approach.
That's amazing. And when you're working with clients, do you typically, right now during the travel restrictions, are you able to have clients come in or are you doing exclusively remote work?
Yeah, I mean, my dream would be to have people coming from the UK or the US or wherever they want to come from, staying here on site. We'll get stuck into it, record a record together, and then they will go away and I'll mix it. Like, that'd be the dream. That's not happening at the moment. So all the clients I've got coming to the studio at the moment are all local. And, they want to record whatever they want to record. And it's cool because that takes me out of my comfort zone, right? Because in an ideal world, I would like to record rock bands. That's what I think I'm really good at and what I can bring most to the table with. But the stuff I'm recording here is like French traditional jazz folk. That's not my area of expertise at all. But again, it's just like agreeing to take the work and using the skills I have. And it's been really cool. Plus, it's really good for me to practice my French and become as fluent in that as I can be, because that's another thing that I'm trying to get good at these days.
Yeah, that was my next question is how good is your French for that to work out in the studio?
Yeah, it's okay. My French it's pretty good. It's getting to the point where I can now express myself pretty clearly. I sometimes struggle to understand something if someone's just said it really quickly. Like casual French is so different to the kind of French you would learn from an app or a book or anywhere where you're being educated French. People just don't talk that way. It's really funny. So trying to extract the meaning from the words you've heard can be more complicated than it should be. The trouble with a studio environment is that recording somebody is so much about interpersonal skills, especially when someone's struggling or not getting the takes that you need. Trying to communicate effectively with somebody to get what you want out of them in a language that isn't your first language. Hard enough in your first language, right, to get that kind of positive emotional response out of somebody and to push them. But doing it in another language where you're just kind of fumbling your way through the sentence is quite tough. But I guess it adds to the fun of the session. And sessions should be fun. It shouldn't be dark and stressful and horrible. It should just be like fun creating music. And if you poke fun at yourself enough, people will start to enjoy themselves, I think. So it's a bit of that.
Well, and it sounds like everything you've done in the past couple of years has been a challenge that you want to challenge yourself. And that's just an extension of that. You're saying, hey, I'm going to work with clients who speak French and my French is good, but it's not great. So it's a learning experience and it's a challenge. And I think that's just an amazing way of looking at life. And if every artist looked at their career that way, we would have so many more amazing, talented artists out there, I think. That all said, Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been awesome speaking with you. An absolute pleasure. Is there anything else you want to put out there? Any links, any websites, any final words? You have the floor.
The label would be upset with me if I didn't say check out the album. Available now on all digital streaming platforms. The album is called Unity, and it's released via Year of the Rat Records. It's available on Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music, everywhere you can consume music from. All of the content that I produce here at the studio is available on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel, so if you just type in the search bar Andy Wilson-Taylor, you will find me. You will find me talking about my life here in France, what it means to renovate an old farmhouse, and sometimes some extra little music bits from me on there. And we're on Facebook, obviously. If you type Midgar into the search bar, you'll find us. I don't expect you'll see any of my posts because that's not how Facebook works anymore. But please hit the like button anyway. And then I'm on Instagram too, welcome to Midgar. And my personal Instagram is A Wilson Taylor, and Sector 7 Studios is on there as well. So yeah, I'm everywhere. And the important thing is that you go check out the album because that's why I'm here in the first place. So yeah, please do.
Sounds great. Well, I will put all of those links into the show notes at bandhive.rocks/84. And you can go there to find them all instead of typing them all in. And you can just click on every single one and hit subscribe, like, whatever it is on that platform. And of course, YouTube, hit the little notification bell. And I think you can do the same thing on Facebook too. So maybe people will see it. I think it's called Show First if you put that in there. But aside from that, Andy, thank you so much. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. I hope the release goes as well as you could possibly have it go.
Thank you so much for having me. Been great to chat.
That does it for this episode of the Band Hive Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And of course, big thanks to Andy Wilson-Taylor of Midgar for joining us on this week's episode. Please go check out his new album, Unity. Like he said, it's available on every major streaming platform. And of course, if you go to bandhive.rocks/84, you will find all the links that Andy and I mentioned during this episode. I also really want to highlight how important mindset is, and it is incredibly obvious to me that Andy has a great mindset when it comes to being an artist. He's not afraid to back down from a challenge. He figures it out and does what needs to be done, and that is what sets artists apart in the music world. So if you take one thing away from this episode, it should be that. Figure it out, be self-sufficient, learn, put in the time, put in the hours, put in the days, whatever it is, weeks, months. You have to learn how to do your thing the best way you possibly can. And of course, be open to opportunities. So I really hope that this is something you learn from this episode. And if you don't already do that, try and do that. And I think you will see more and more opportunities come your way because it is so incredibly useful as an artist to be able to say, yeah, I can do that, and then figure it out. I don't even know what to say that. It is incredible. So thank you for listening. If you want to get more out of Band Hive, please feel free to join our Facebook community. We have over 500 like-minded musicians who are all looking to take their career to the next level, whether that's having fans pay for the production of an album or going full-time. Everyone's goals are unique, but it is worth sharing knowledge with one another, and that is what the Band Hive Facebook group is for. So you can find that by going to bandhive.rocks/group, or searching for Band Hive on Facebook. Make sure you find the group, not the page. Although while you're there, please go ahead and give the page a like as well. Aside from that, we will be back with another brand new episode next Tuesday. I'm really looking forward to that one coming out because I think it's going to be super helpful for all you artists who are looking to book more shows post-pandemic. That's next Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time in your favorite podcasting app. Until then, have an awesome week, stay safe, and of course, as always, keep rocking.